You know, we often speak of the spiritual journey as a path or even a trail. I love that. Sometimes in the regular outside world, trails and paths lead to places like this. This is Mount Shasta in the background here in Northern California. And I feel incredibly grateful to be here today on this beautiful day. As we think of the spiritual journey as a path, sometimes it seems like a very external thing. And there is that component to us. Of course, we'll be asked to deal with what's in front of our noses here in the world in a very worldly way. But if we're really going to take the fullest possible advantage of being on that path and going where that path can most richly lead us, then there comes a point where we have to recognize that where the spiritual rubber really meets the road, or the boots meet the path, is so very internal, not external. And so even though we may be willing to go out and about, again, we have to contend with the fact that unless that's also an inner journey, then we're probably not really accomplishing a heck of a lot as far as advancing on our spiritual path. What that really looks like is when we can take a step back from what's inside our minds. The spiritual path is always an inside game. In fact, if we look closely, all of our experience is an inside game, even out here. I can enjoy the beauty of a place like this. I can feel the exquisiteness of feeling connected to it. But when I feel like I'm looking at something beautiful, or I'm feeling that connection to something much greater, where do I actually experience that? If I look carefully, I have to recognize that I experience that wholly and completely internally. It's inside. It's in my consciousness. It's in my awareness. It's inside. Even if I'm huffing and puffing up the trail and I'm exhausted, where do I really experience that feeling and that thought of this is exhausting? Well, it's a thought and it's a feeling, and those arise internally. Every bit of it is really an internal game and an internal experience. Sometimes people talk about how they really want to get away from it all. They want to take a step away. And I can understand where that comes from, because there is that internal corollary. But sometimes it's hard to make that leap where we take that backward step, not just externally, but we use that to take that backward step internally and take a step back from the contents of our mind. And it doesn't matter which part of the mind, it just take a step back from the machinating, whether it's considered positive or negative or painful or pleasurable or anything. It doesn't, the content of it, in fact, doesn't really matter. But the experience of being able to take a backward step from what's going on inside the mind, to take that step back so that one can then observe it, recognize it, acknowledge it, not in a way that's judgmental, but simply recognizes what's going on in the mind. That's when we begin to touch something greater than what's merely the contents of our thoughts. That's when we begin to take a step backward into something that can take us into a dimension that is far more vast than that small, contracted, individuated sense of what we've identified with in all of those thoughts. We can step back from that identification. And there can be no question in any way whatsoever that is wholly and completely an inner game, and always will be. So I would simply wish to take a moment like this, absolutely regardless of where you might be, what circumstance you might find yourself in, and invite you with me just for a moment. We can go together in this. And step back from whatever is running in your mind. The feelings, the thoughts. We let them run for a moment and we merely take a step back and take a look at them in a way that is wholly and completely without judgment of any kind. It is merely a step back so that we can observe from a distance. And from that quiet place, we can begin to embrace absolutely everything. And as we go about the world, perhaps we can continue walking in spirit. Peace be with you, my friends.